Hello, I'm Alison Hargreaves from guidesforbrides.co.uk with the latest roundup on what's happening in weddings, the highs and lows. There have not been many highs this week. However, we are going to start with Wales because that is one place where they have finally had the news they have been waiting so patiently for. Wales has tended to be a little bit behind on most things, so it was a lovely surprise for couples and venues in Wales that it was announced that from Monday the 3rd, so this is now already in place, licensed venues can now hold civil ceremonies and civil partnerships. So that means weddings aren't just restricted to places of worship and register offices. And that is for, I was going to say unlimited numbers, not quite as good as that, but the limitation is based on the size of the venue. Now in Wales, the 2 metre social distancing is very, very strict. So that's 2 metres between households. They have enforced that particularly firmly in Wales. So I think they are confident that that will be enforceable within the venues. At the moment, places of worship aren't obliged to open, so if they're not wanting to offer weddings, then that is their choice. But what we're expecting is to see a lot more weddings in these civil venues, so licensed venues. As for receptions, there are also going to be receptions in Wales, so they have gone way ahead of many other parts of the UK. So this is for a maximum of 30 people. And that is just outdoors. I believe I've heard that they are going to be looking on about the 15th as to whether they might be able to start opening some sort of hospitality indoors for weddings as well. But that is not confirmed. Now, if you are looking for this information on the government website, we've looked and looked, it's still not there. So we've gone back and we've listened again and again to the news to make sure we have got this right. So face masks are going to be required where appropriate there. So Scotland is still on phase 3. So this means, sorry, in Scotland it is still that limit of 20 people. That's inside or outside. That number excludes the celebrant and any venue staff. That number isn't quite that sort of same hard number we've seen, for example, for England and for outdoor weddings in outdoor receptions in Wales. The language used around that in Scotland is preferably no more than 20, and they are advising no more than 20. So it's a slightly more gentle guidance than in other areas. No receptions in Scotland. Anything that you're doing after the actual legal ceremony would be limited to the normal social distancing guidelines. So that is up to 8 people inside from 3 different households, or if it's outside, up to 15 people from 5 different households. So as for Northern Ireland, for Scotland, no updates expected for a while. That's 20th of August. That's due to be looked at again. So I'm afraid in Scotland, it's not looking like that is about to change. For Northern Ireland, the 30 limit for outdoor weddings was lifted on the 10th of July. Nothing has changed there, so that is, again, very similar to in Wales. The capacity is based on the venue capacity to allow for 2 metre social distancing. Now, that's 2 metres between households, but because the registrar and the venue don't know how many different households will be attending, they're tending to need to allow 2 metres per person. So it might feel more restricted than you're expecting it to be from that point of view, and very, very difficult for anyone to be able to really demonstrate how many different households are there. Hopefully a little bit of common sense will be applied there. The weddings in Northern Ireland can be in local government venues, as well as in venues licensed for civil ceremonies, so that's marriages, civil partnership venues. So that is for Northern Ireland. Face covering strongly advised in Northern Ireland. What we absolutely love is for Northern Ireland, the Executive Office has come out with really, really clear guidance. It's on the website. There's pages of it. Everything from how to have your hair and makeup done before the wedding ceremony, how the actual ceremony will run, and exactly what is and isn't allowed for the reception. And they are very much putting the onus on the couples and as well as the venues. It's not just the responsibility of the venues, whereas it is in other areas, very much putting the onus on both to comply with that guidance. But really nice to have such incredibly clear guidance on everything. It covers transport, getting guests there, photographs, you're allowed cake cuttings, you're allowed a first dance, nobody else is allowed to join. You're allowed speeches under certain, again, COVID secure speeches. So really, really good guidance there. And again, Northern Ireland encouraging live streaming, so there's remote participation. So as for England, I think we're all still reeling from that news on Friday, just as we thought that small receptions for up to 30 people seated would be allowed at the very last minute. That was pulled away. So that was less than 12 hours from when they would have been permitted. And the message is very, very clear from government. They have said that the reason they have done it is it would not have been safe. So very, very clear message there. Wedding ceremonies can still go ahead, so that is exactly as they have been since 4th of July. So ceremonies in churches in England, in register offices and in venues licensed for civil ceremonies and civil partnerships. They need to follow COVID secure guidelines. And they are really now starting to understand what they can and can't do. We're hearing that registrars are able to be a little bit more relaxed in what they're doing. They're able to see what does and doesn't work. We're not hearing tales of people having to sanitize their hands before exchanging rings, which was talk of very early on. From the 8th of August, face coverings will be required. Anyone looking for the guidance on that, it is online. It's not been put on the marriage guidance, I don't think yet. It's actually on a different piece of guidance that's saying what has changed on the 31st of July. So if you're wanting to have a look for that, we'll be sending the links out to everyone in the next couple of days. But that is for everyone except for the bride and groom. So bride and groom do not have to wear a face mask in order to get married, but everyone else will need to. Again, 2 meters social distancing, requirement for venues to comply with test and trace. So we've got our track and trace software out there. It's being used by about 140 venues already, which is great news and really is going to help make sure COVID isn't brought into these venues. And if it is, that you as guests and as the couple will know very, very quickly. We can keep suppliers safe, so it's a really important part of it. And then, of course, live streaming. Delighted so many people are using the live streaming system now, and we're able to stream weddings. We've got contact us. We can fill you in on all of the details, but it allows you to stream out on Facebook so everyone can join you and leave comments and so on. So from the 15th of August at the earliest, those receptions for 30 people seated in England may be allowed again. It is going to be the 15th at the earliest. We still haven't had any guidance issued as to how those might happen, other than the fact it is just going to be a sit-down meal. This really was, I think, the government reacting to everyone saying, if we can go to a pub and a restaurant, why can't we do this? And also perhaps knowing that a lot of people were slightly bending the rules and perhaps going to pubs and restaurants where they're much, much closer together than they would be in a big COVID-secure wedding venue. So it just made sense to allow wedding venues that same option as pubs and restaurants. That has been closed down. Anything that constitutes what they would call a large reception as in 30 people, is not allowed at the moment. If you are wanting to have any sort of celebration in England, it is limited to social distancing rules. That means 6 people from different households outside, or people from 2 different households inside, unless you're in a lockdown area. If you're in a lockdown area, it needs to be within the rules from that area, so that means people can't come to your house or a private garden for that socially distant, tiny weeny celebration of 6 people or 2 households. So what are we seeing as a result of, just before I get onto the questions, I promise you I will get onto all of the questions. I thought it was just quite useful because we've heard mixed reports. We are still really alarmingly hearing from couples in England who are saying our venue's going ahead, you know, this is happening, that's happening. We've been told we can have 120 guests later on in the month, all sorts of you know, similar tales. There is a requirement for venue managers to react rapidly to enforcement officers, the enforcing authorities. There is a requirement for them to comply with legislation and guidance. So, for example, the social distancing guidance, there is a requirement for them to be completing risk assessments around COVID and for them to be following these risk assessments. So, although it is guidance, there is a requirement that that guidance is followed. It is the HSE and local authorities that can enforce that. It is a criminal offence and it carries a fine and up to 2 years in prison. Plus, of course, these venues can lose their licence. Perhaps more importantly, the risk to these venues is reputational. What we were noticing over the weekend is people were naming and shaming. They want to be safe. They want everyone to be safe. They don't want these secret weddings to be taking place that put suppliers at risk and the reputation and integrity of the industry at risk. So it's incredibly frustrating. All of these suppliers, these venues are desperate to help couples, but please, please, if you're planning a wedding, please don't put your suppliers and your venue under unfair pressure to go ahead with the plans. It's just, you know, the government have made a very clear statement on this. It's not safe at the moment. There have been some questions on whether weddings can go ahead at home, and again, the government have clarified they should not happen at home. Where do we see this taking us in the future? If anyone is following the scientific reports, since Friday, they have been saying that they have reached the limits of what can open safely. And in the last 24 hours, they have been saying not only have they reached the limits, they've actually gone a little bit beyond the limits of what could open safely. So it's perhaps not the positive news that anyone was hoping for. I think we were all seeing these weddings starting to be allowed as being fantastic. This is the step in the right direction. I think more and more we're saying, right, there needs to be that parity. If weddings are going to be allowed, it should be weddings of all cultures that are allowed, and there's a lot within the industry that feel that that is an important part. We're a multicultural society, and it doesn't feel right to be allowing these little tiny weddings that don't take into consideration the size wedding required for some of the cultural weddings taking place within our society. We want the venues, the big venues, to be able to open and to be able to open safely with a reasonable capacity, and to include all of the amazing suppliers you want at your wedding. But perhaps what we're looking at for now is that if that can't happen safely, it shouldn't be happening until that can happen safely. And whether that means that we're waiting for a vaccine, it'll be very interesting to see the government's feeling on that. From within the industry, we are all just asking for some clarity from the government. Anyone following the What About Weddings campaign, it's been all about asking for that clarity and that parity and also that financial support that we need to get to next year to be able to carry out all of the weddings that have been postponed to next year. You know, fingers crossed, later on this year or next year, it will be safe, you know, when that vaccine is there and we can all get back out and party. But until then, let's keep safe. So let's have a look at some of these questions, and hopefully I can help. Yes, sorry, Stephen. Yes, it's not the best news. We try to be as upbeat as we possibly can. We're enjoying these little wins in places like Wales, and we look forward to Scotland. Has got a very, very low R rate. So Scotland, we think, has been very cautious. Hopefully is going to be good news for Scotland. I'd love to give more positive news to England, but I think the Prime Minister has been quite clear. We were really, really hoping weddings in August, and it looked great for the 1st of August. But I think putting the brakes on now, and I'm guessing the government will also be quite correctly prioritising getting children back to school in September in the grand scale of things. However important your wedding is to you and to us, we have to look at it in that bigger scale. So Katie, Nicole, yes, Wales, unlimited numbers, yes. So it's not unlimited numbers as in have any number. The number is limited by the venue capacity for the wedding ceremony. That's 2 meters social distancing, and we are expecting to be very strict on that. So 2 meters between households, but from everything we've heard, they'll be leaving 2 meters between each person to make sure that if everyone has come from a different household for that wedding, that is allowed. There is, however, a restriction on ceremonies. So the ceremonies are restricted to 30 people. I think in reality it will mean people will probably restrict their weddings to 30, because you're not going to have your wedding ceremony and then kind of wave goodbye to some of your guests. So it probably means even in the bigger venues people are going to be limiting that. So Harriet, no update in England since Friday. So this is really just catching up on the implications of what's been going on since Friday. And hi Harriet to Shropshire Event Nannies. Yes, sorry, you're amongst the many people that would be desperate to get back to work. So yes, sorry. Yes, and amazing news for weddings in Wales. Yeah, I think it was really, really unexpected. And Wales are great at just suddenly pinging these on us. It comes by surprise. So last time that there was a big update from Wales, probably a month, 6 weeks ago, losing track of time now. Last time there was a big update, it appeared on the website, but nobody really announced it. Anyone reading the website was kind of like, hang on a minute, where did this come from? And venues weren't aware that this was when the restriction preventing weddings taking place happened. So over a month ago, venues weren't aware, registrar offices, it left everyone wondering what on earth was going on, because it was suddenly just announced by the First Minister. The reverse has happened this time. It has been announced, but they've not updated their website. So if you look on the website, that information isn't on there. If you're wanting to reassure yourself, if you are in Wales, if you're an approved venue going, really, are we really allowed to open? Just rewind Friday's news, have a look on Friday's news. It was all on there. Yep, thank you for adding that update in there. So, yeah, I think that's all just checking on Wales. Wish we had the same for England. Yes, as you say, so close. What about father walking the bride down the aisle in the same household? Will he have to wear a mask? Well, number one, yes, he will. It is only the bride and groom that don't have to wear masks. We're assuming, I've not double checked on registrars, but we would assume that because they are at work, and again, if the staff, sort of security staff or anyone else from the venue there within the room, I suspect they won't be forced to wear a mask, but it's certainly recommended. So obviously in places of work, it's why we've got this slightly unusual situation that you go into a shop and have to wear a mask, but those working in the shop don't have to. It's still advised, but my guess would be registrars won't have to wear a mask. What about the father walking down the bride down the aisle? Now, I'm not 100% sure that, I don't think this has been changed. So they are different households unless they have formed a bubble. If the father lives alone and has chosen to form a bubble with the bride's household, obviously that would be allowed. Some have, and I know quite a few people have gone down that route. I think this is one to speak to the registrar. Most people seem to be taking a common sense approach on this. I have a feeling it may have changed but it's probably more likely just it was one of the things we were pushing to change because just logically it seems so low risk. That just seemed to be one of those things that makes a very, very big difference to people to be able to walk down the aisle. So, but he would need to most definitely be wearing a mask. My vicar has said today, bride and groom will have to wear masks. So it'd be worth just talking to your vicar. The guidance is very clear online. As I said, it's on the guidance from the so it's guidance for the 31st of July update. It's not yet on that small weddings update, and it's very clear it excludes the bride and groom. But it may be that your vicar is wanting to take extra precautions, and I think in that situation, you know, we really need to respect that. Quite often vicars, I don't want to stereotype, but quite often they are of an older generation. They really need to be looked after. So have a chat. It may be that, but if it is just that they've misunderstood the guidance, because it's easy for us. We are only interested in this guidance, and even so, my goodness, with 4 different parts of the UK to be looking at, as well as keeping an eye on what's happening internationally, it's hard enough keeping on top of it. If you're a vicar and you're also needing to keep on top of guidance around funerals as well, which is changing just as often, it's quite possible that you know, they've just not they're just not fully up to date. So find that guidance. The best thing to do is email them the link so you can read it for themselves. That is the most useful thing to do for anyone. You know, if you're hearing something contradictory, email that guidance and just from the original document, send them a link, you know, tell them where to find the bit that it is you're referring to, and that might help. So Sally's asking about wedding insurance. This is a really, really good question. So we've got a blog piece that we've just published in the last couple of days that was covering that, and I am, for some reason, there we go. So with Emerald, but that wasn't much use at all. Are you aware of any new policies? So yes, there are. I'm not sure I'd say we're recommending any new policies yet. So Cover My Wedding does have a new policy. We have been trying to get through to them, to speak to them, without any luck at all. Been trying for days. And my feeling is that at times like this, you need to be absolutely sure with what you're buying, and you want to be able to speak to somebody. You want to know that if there's a problem, someone's going to answer that phone. So I'm really hoping that Cover My Wedding realise they are the only ones at the moment that we are aware of. Do please pop a note in the comments that are offering insurance. Now, it's a very good question though. Let's have a quick chat about insurance. Thank you to everyone that left notes last week. We asked the question on insurance, and if you just look further down on the Facebook page, there's a whole load of comments and really, really helpful information on that. Quite a few of the policies have decided that they will not cover weddings postponed beyond the 1st of October. So this isn't covering the postponement. This is on the assumption that the venue is saying, yes, you can go ahead and postpone, and they've moved it free of charge. So it's not that there's a sort of financial cost that you're claiming on the insurance for. It's very simply that you don't want your wedding to take place on, say, the 10th of October. Your venue's agreed to move it to the 5th of March. You want your cover to move to the 5th of March, and the main insurers in the last couple of weeks have changed their policy on this, and they've said if your wedding is beyond the 1st of October, we're not going to just automatically move it across. You're going to have to wait. They have said they are going to review that in September in line with the latest government advice. So what we think will happen is if and when in September the government are saying actually events aren't going to open up, because remember, other events are all starting from the 1st of October. There's a lot happening from the 1st of October. So there was a lot of hope that weddings might start to go back to a little bit more normality from the 1st of October. So I think they're looking at that and saying, well, there's just a chance that from October we could be having these weddings. So let's not overly complicate things by saying yes, postpone. Now, you would need to check, I believe the insurers have written to most couples to set out exactly what you need to be doing, but just check whether you will still have that cover. You're not going to want to just lose that cover because you know you can't get insurance elsewhere. So if it's a matter of them needing you to wait until nearer the time before you postpone, speak to the venue, let them know the problem, let them know that you're with Wedding Plan or Debenhams or whichever one, you know, I know those are two of the ones that have this policy, and see if the venue can pencil in a date. You might need to put a holding deposit on, but don't officially postpone. That's just a backup date. You have not postponed until you've got that permission from your insurance company. And again, with any other decisions you're making that you think you may be insured for, check with the insurance company first. The other one is going to be sequel weddings. So sequel weddings where you might be going ahead with your small ceremony now. This will be particularly if it's in England, where now you can only go ahead with the small ceremony part, that you might be saying, right, well, let's get that bit done. We then don't need to worry about the registrar later on, and we'll have that bigger reception next year or whenever you're going to have it. The policies generally allow you to have your ceremony and your reception on different days, but they're designed on the assumption that this is in normal times to allow for the fact that you might have a register office wedding so that you can have a celebrant-led wedding that isn't legally binding for your actual wedding in front of all of your guests with the reception afterwards, so you can have that lovely outdoor wedding. So I had to just put that in there for our amazing celebrants who, the independent celebrants, are still not able to carry out ceremonies, which seems really, really harsh on them. So yeah, so do bear that in mind if you're moving to next year. Go for a celebrant-led ceremony, have your registrar now. But back to what we were talking about. So for those weddings where it would have been registry office and then perhaps the following day with a celebrant, these policies are all designed with that in mind. So they will allow you to cover those two different elements. However, generally there's a 21-day limit on it. So check if there is a limit if you have that sort of insurance and you're wanting a sequel wedding. You may then have to make the decision as to whether this is your wedding or the next half of it is your wedding. Obviously, you know, if it was this time last week, I would have said clearly you're going to move the insurance to the bigger event, the reception, but that would have left you out of pocket if you had planned a wedding that was then cancelled at the very last minute. I hope that helps on that one. So again, a few questions on insurance. Hopefully that covers it. So is there a limit to the amount of households in England for an indoor ceremony? No, it's 30 people with social distancing, but that's 30 people including anyone other than venue staff that needs to be included within that. So again, told that in church, everyone including bride and groom have to wear the face mask. I think once the guidance moves from just that one page that's about the updates from the 31st onto the wedding page, it's going to be much clearer. Nobody knows to look on the other page, so it's not very helpful when little bits of guidance get put in different places, and sometimes they appear to contradict each other. There's some of the guidance that talks about venues that can hold weddings that are licensed for more than 30 people, and it's just saying that the venue is licensed for more than 30 people, not that you can hold weddings for more than 30 people there. So for example, I know there's no straight answers, but do you think a full reception will be allowed by the end of October? I'm just trying to open this up so I can see your full question there. Sorry, I can't see the end of the question there, but so a lot of the events industry is opening up for October. This time last week I would have been quite optimistic. Everything that's been said since Friday, you know, I hate to be a pessimist on this, but I would certainly be worried that until there's a vaccine, there's not going to be a massive amount going on. So it depends what you mean by a full reception. Certainly if you're thinking dancing, I would say, to be honest, no, I can't see it happening. I just can't see it happening at the moment. Please, 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 let me be proved wrong on that one. But you know, I think really we need to get that vaccine so that people are safe. And it's not just the regulations, it's that people, as we know, they don't want to catch this virus. It's a hideous virus. And more of us are speaking to people that have got it and had it, so know just how hideous it is. So 3rd of October, do you think we'll be able to have more than 30 people and a meal? I would hope that the meal will be back by then. It may depend on where the government sit on. I mean, if you speak to, looking at our survey results next week, which we'll be publishing later on this week, the survey results showed that 65% of couples, and exactly the same number, 65% of venues would actually prefer to postpone while the restrictions are 30 for a sit down. It's putting them under intense financial pressure. If they're the bigger venues, they just can't do it. It's pushing couples from these beautiful wedding venues into pubs, restaurants, inns that can, that can flex with the times more easily. Is really putting the industry under a lot more pressure. And we're also finding that people are saying, a lot of their guests they're just uncomfortable. They're going to come to your wedding because it's your wedding day, but they really are uncomfortable with that number of other strangers. So talking to the individual churches and registrars, best option to see what they're doing. That advice is great right the way across everything. Speak to your venue. Just bear in mind the fact that a lot of the venues, they're absolutely exhausted from it's soul-destroying work to be postponing and changing plans again. So just bear that in mind. They don't mind doing it. They're there to help you, but just bear in mind. And it was lovely last week. We did the We're Here campaign on Saturday, and so many of you were all over our Facebook and Instagram. We're going to be doing more on that. We'll be doing a review campaign next week, and just trying to get as many positive reviews for those venues and suppliers that have been amazing at this time. Remember, they've not been able to furlough themselves because they've wanted to be there for you to answer your questions. They've not accessed those job retention schemes so they can be there for you. So please, 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 when we send that out next week, please jump on there and give them all a shout out and add reviews for them. It's not just about how they were for your wedding. As we all know, actually what's going to be the decision maker for couples over the next couple of years is how well their venue or their suppliers looked after them if things didn't quite go right and plans had to be readjusted. So what about 2021 weddings? How can we guarantee we won't be restricted again? I guess we find the vaccine and we hope that there's not another killer virus coming across. We can't give those guarantees. I think how I would look at it, and I've spoken to a few people who've become very anxious about 2021 weddings because we all felt that was the answer. Move it to 2021. Don't let yourself get anxious, and I know that's really, really hard to say. Instead of looking at it as that's our wedding date and oh my goodness, what happens if we have to cancel? Look at it as you have the right to get married on that date. You have that date booked in. That is your date. And if you choose later on this year to get married on that date, that's yours. It's going to happen. There's nothing can stand in your way because you've booked the venue, you've got the suppliers lined up. They're all being brilliant about making sure there's flexibility on deposits and so on now for any new contract. So anyone new coming in has that reassurance. And I think just be as relaxed as you can about it. You want it to be fabulous. You don't want to be in that situation that couples were in on Friday of such devastating news right at the last minute. And, for a while we've got local lockdowns, that is going to be the picture that we're seeing for a little bit. Don't know whether to go ahead with wedding in Wales or wait till the postponed date in March. It probably depends on just how relaxed you are. Just remember that your guests will be there and ready. There's not much else going on. Generally, they're very happy waiting until the last minute to make decisions on this sort of thing. So perhaps just share your plans with your guests. Speak to your venue. If you're happy with that reception for 30 outside, so I don't know if you caught it when I was saying that I believe there is some talk of the First Minister in Wales changing or certainly looking at whether hospitality indoors could open up to allow for wedding receptions indoors. So the assumption is, clearly it's going to be within social distancing guidelines, so that's going to be 2 meters between households. But what they're tending to do is seat households on the same table, and then 2 meters between the tables, so that covers that. So I think wait until after the 15th, I think, to make a decision on that, and see how that goes. Unfortunately, in Wales, what we know is that the chances are it will be a sudden decision. There's not going to be this sort of, this is going to happen in 2 weeks. It does tend to be announcement on Friday, this is happening on Monday. So, you know, not massively helpful for you. So if Boris doesn't lift the wedding ban on the 15th, you better shut pubs and gyms. Yeah, I couldn't say it more. And in fact, the fact that pubs and restaurants have been open, and I'm sorry if there's any pubs and restaurants listening, the fact they've been open has been really damaging to the industry, because it's meant that people can, you know, can move their wedding there, and then if it's cancelled at the last minute, the pub just puts on a special and, you know, sells the meal that should have been served for your wedding to anyone that comes in, and we need to look after our venues. So yes, hopefully, you know, we don't want further restrictions, but you know, I think we all just want a little bit of normality if we can have that. Will our guests have to wear face coverings if our wedding is outside? No, they won't. So really good news to those in Wales. Obviously, during the reception, face coverings are recommended, but because your reception will be outside in Wales for up to 30 guests, for up to 30 people present, you wouldn't need to wear a face covering for that. Always a little bit difficult anyway when you're eating and drinking. And so if you're in Northern Ireland or Scotland and the wedding is outside, then won't be needed. If you're in England, you might be thinking, okay, so what about in England? Obviously, there are certain religious groups that can marry you outside. Celebrants can still, independent celebrants still can't, because it needs to be a legal ceremony still. And it needs to be cut to the minimal parts of the ceremony to make it legal is one of the parts of the guidance. So if you look at a celebrant-led ceremony, that means none of it. So, you know, you need to cut the celebrant-led ceremony to nothing, therefore, you know, it's not a ceremony. So, but other outdoor weddings, so wedding ceremonies in England, it's been quite difficult having them in most of the places that are licensed, because generally how they were designed is for the rules, which were basically needs to be big enough for the registrars and the bride and groom and the 2 witnesses to fit in, but you wanted all of your guests to be as close as possible so they feel like they're involved. So generally these outdoor venues were built to that sort of really minimum size. They're sort of, you know, these pagodas and sort of gazebo type structures, and they're too small for social distancing. So it's slightly backfired. These fabulous outdoor venues, we've been really hoping. You know, I'm kind of giving up hope now for this summer, but we were really hoping that the government in England and Wales would lift that ban to allow weddings to take place outside if the registrar was happy with the place that was being chosen for that ceremony. So you could be at the licensed venue, but outside in the garden, so that everyone could be outside. It's safer. It just makes more sense. But sadly, doesn't seem to be something the government's considering. So Kim has said, yes, thank you. Sounds like everyone's doing different things. Yes, it is different in England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and different from country to country. But what we do know is those countries that have had the second waves have been the countries that have been allowing social events with up to 100 people at some of these social events. I don't know how much that has to do with the second wave they're experiencing, but you know, we have to remember there's a pandemic, and perhaps they will be rethinking their policies as a result of that. There was a marquee with a sign that said "Happy Wedding" above it in the front garden on the main road. How is that allowed? Yeah, it's not. And in lockdown areas, it's very clear you can't even have 6 people in your garden from 6 different households. And there have been, marquee companies have been put under pressure I don't think the royal wedding was very helpful on this aspect because it made it look like weddings were allowed. No idea what was going on there, but it didn't look, the sort of things that were going in and out didn't look like they were the sort of things being allowed for anyone else. And I think that's caused you know, a lot of resentment and also a lot of confusion. But no, receptions aren't allowed. So if it's a marquee, that can't happen, you know, unless it's 6 people. You know, you know, the guidance is very, very clear. These gatherings, this 30-person exemption is very much just for the ceremony. So just for the ceremony itself, you can have up to 30 people in the same place, but not other than that. Do we think it will be okay for March? Do we think we'll be okay for December? Really, really hard to tell. You know, I think the government's next priority, I believe, will be to get people back to school. Whether they will allow the weddings for up to 30 people seated in the meantime, I'm not sure. If there's a vaccine before December, quite possibly. But one of the things that will be interesting as we get towards December is there's going to be massive pressure for Christmas parties. It was one of the things that Boris mentioned in his big sort of opening up speech before the 4th of July, that you know, the hope was for a little bit more normality. They're sort of aiming for more normality from November onwards, or not before November, with the idea that you know, possibly these Christmas parties might be able to take place. I don't think they're going to be able to allow Christmas parties where there's that amount of socialising from people in different households if they're still not allowing weddings. So there's going to be a lot of pressure from a lot of different sectors as well as we get towards Christmas on that one. There won't be, oh, Bridget, no, we can't think of that one. Yes, you say there won't be a vaccine. Not all viruses are suited to vaccines, and I know some countries are looking at herd immunity. There's some discussions on herd immunity, but the worry is we don't really know what the long-term chronic conditions are that COVID could cause, and you can't go telling everyone under 25 that, you know, we're going to be infecting you to protect everyone else. So, you know, hopefully we're seeing treatments are improving, you know, all of these things are getting better, so that's certainly going to help. My daughter went for 2022, and hopefully she can enjoy the build-up, the hen-do, the planning. If in doubt, postpone. Great message there, Sally. Yes, postpone. I mean, what we don't want is people cancelling. Please, please, please. I know I probably sound like a broken record now. You know, you plan to get married for a reason. Let's have that party, have it there to look forward to. However far in the future you feel comfortable postponing to. Most venues are really happy for you to postpone to later on this year or to next year, with the idea of them postponing again if that's what's needed. But equally, if you're more comfortable just saying, no, 2022, I'm then going to be really confident that I can enjoy the build-up and that is going to be my date, then great. And you know, that seems sensible. Be aware if you are postponing, although a lot of venues have been amazing at offering free postponement, and most of them are charging. We've completed our survey. Thank you to all those that completed that last week. But the majority of places are charging less than 15% to postpone to next year. The very, very large majority aren't charging at all if it's an off-peak date. So if you can go for midweek, and remember, if it is midweek, there's that extra, there's government legislation meaning people can carry over more holiday to next year. So people are going to be able to attend, and hey, if things carry on this way, there's going to be a lot of people unemployed. So there we go. There's midweek weddings, you know, are not going to be one of those things that people are wanting to avoid. Weddings will be on any day of the week, so please don't be afraid of going for a midweek wedding. If you're wanting to go for a weekend, great. Be aware you may need to pay slightly more. If you're wanting to postpone to 2020, there's real mixed opinions on how much is fair to charge. You've got to bear in mind the fact venues will probably be doing additional works. The venue is going to quite possibly have had a renovation, it might have had extensions, it might have new facilities by the time we get to 2022. So what you paid for a wedding in 2020 will probably not cover the cost of a wedding in 2022. The chances are their prices will have gone up. So just bear that in mind. It's not the venue trying to be unreasonable. There is legislation, and the CMA should be publishing their guidance quite soon. We're certainly expecting that before the autumn, but very clear guidance on what is and isn't fair in those sort of situations. But it is perfectly reasonable to expect to be paying more. I would say, you know, an extra 15% would be very, very, very normal. So just bear that in mind. So Samantha asking, could ceremonies get stopped? Not sure if you mean kind of like mid-ceremony, if a ceremony isn't following social distancing guidelines and the registrar's not comfortable, absolutely yes. If the vicar's not comfortable, absolutely yes. If the local authority do a spot check and they are checking that people are being compliant, yes, they could stop a ceremony partway through. Could ceremonies be stopped completely? I guess it's not impossible. It would be a big backward step, and we've not seen anything that would suggest that ceremonies are causing an increase in cases of COVID. So our track and trace app is being used by about 140 different venues, and we've not yet had any alerts through that. So that is very, very positive. And I would say that the nature of a ceremony is very, very different. So it's much more controlled. People tend to be sitting next to each other. They're facing forward. The venue can set the room in a particular way. And there's not that face-to-face interaction or people moving from one person to the next, which is inevitable in a wedding reception. So, and this is what the government's keen to avoid, is households coming together that don't usually see each other, eating and drinking, which means removing face masks, you know, speaking to each other, you know, in fairly close proximity, numerous people in the same room, which means you tend to raise your voice. So all of these things just make it higher risk. So I would hope the actual ceremonies will still be there. So yes, again, we want pubs to close if we can't have weddings. I guess it's that thing, the government are wanting to open up whichever bits of the economy they feel is safe. But it would be really nice to see pubs and restaurants perhaps being closely regulated by their local authorities, because I think that's what people are finding hard, is it looks like people can do anything. And you know, they're very happy to have a completely compliant wedding reception, but which will probably be live streamed. People will be able to see it. They'll be able to see everyone's doing as they should. Yet, you know, people are doing what they want elsewhere. So do we think that until we have vaccine, weddings won't go back to normal? So normal is, yes, how do you define normal? Dancing is quite hard to see that level of interaction. So do we think October is likely to be slightly larger, less than 100? So it depends on the opening of the events industry, which from the 1st October, a lot of events can start happening. That doesn't at the moment include weddings, but I think there was hope that might be a stepping stone. So it's going to depend on how things go, I think, with infection rates when schools go back, and from other events. So and wedding in England, 40 in the day, 80 in the evening for the reception. So I'm guessing the reason for the evening reception is going to be because you're wanting dancing and music. So again, I would say that's highly unlikely for October, where we are at the moment. We'll get the 30 people ceremony and reception. Let's go. Does a face visor count as a face covering? Yeah, I would say it certainly should. And I would say from the point of view of accessibility, and you know, remembering there are a lot of people in our community who are hard of hearing, and face masks are really not great for them. And at a wedding, very often you'll have elderly guests. You know, you might have your grandfather who's got hearing difficulty. For him, not being able to get involved because he can't read what people are saying, it becomes, you know, a really, really important part of that sort of social integration. So no, I think, you know, I would prefer to see people in face visors. So correctly worn, they certainly seem to be safe. So at the moment it says, I think it's face masks is the wording rather than face coverings, but we would have to check exactly what that is. So yeah, so Kirsty, oh, I feel for you. I'm due to get married on August the 15th. I can't get excited because I'm constantly on edge. And you're probably all also wondering about the implications on what happens with all of your suppliers. Because there was that awful situation on Friday where, you know, the first thought is, oh my goodness, these poor couples who are planning to get married tomorrow. You know, you've probably already done your nails and you've got everything lined up, and you know, the dress is hanging ready to go on, and then Boris comes on just after 12 o'clock and says it's not going to happen, and I cannot imagine what you were going through. But the ripple effect then on the venue, who had already prepped all of the food, it would have all been prepped and ready to go. The florist that will have finished your bouquet and that would have been sitting in the cauldron ready to go. The cake would have been completely ready, boxed, possibly even already delivered to the venue. Your photographer would have got everything lined up. You know, his shirt was pressed, he was ready to go. You know, he had cancelled all of his plans because he was definitely finally working again, had probably even had that celebratory glass to go, great, fantastic, I'm going to be back at work from the first, and that all stopped. And the costs of that are really significant, and that's going to be really hard for those couples that are trying to make that decision on whether to go ahead, because it's not fair on the suppliers to bear that cost. They will try to reduce it as much as possible, but even things like, you know, you could say, well, they're not going to have the staffing costs on the day. Well, they will, because you can't cancel staff with no notice. You're still going to have to pay them, even if there's nothing for them to do. There's not a lot you can do with that beautiful bouquet. You can't take it apart and make it into, you know, some other sort of bouquet. It's clearly a bridal bouquet. So, and that's going to be the risk for those couples on the 15th. And also, going forward, those couples that, you know, if this does open back up again on the 15th, and we, you know, the hope is that it might. A lot of people are hoping that actually the government just waits until weddings can happen properly with all suppliers involved. But if they do start happening from the 15th, just bear in mind local lockdowns, that if all of a sudden your area is affected by a local lockdown, then things could change suddenly. There are lists online, so you can keep an eye on it, but there are some anomalies in there. So, for example, Swindon is really, really high up on that list. And we looked into, you know, why hasn't that locked down? What's going on there? Well, actually, in Swindon, it's that, and, you know, does that mean anywhere below that is therefore safe because Swindon's not locked down? And no, it's that was very isolated. It was in a Honda plant in an Iceland depot, so they knew it was very contained. It wasn't out there within the community. So there are government websites that you can keep an eye on to see whether your area may be affected by these local lockdowns, but it's not literally a matter of going down that list and going, right, we're going to be next. But remember those implications. Remember the implications on your suppliers as well. If you are taking that risk, it needs to be your choice as long as your suppliers are happy. But it probably will mean that if you are wanting to go ahead, then you are needing to take that responsibility. You know, that would be my feeling. I'm not a law specialist on this area at all, but my feeling would be morally, and this is where most venues and suppliers have fallen back to, they've not necessarily just been enforcing contracts because that would just not be kind at this time and not helpful for couples. They have been trying to do what seems right morally, and I would say if you as a couple have said, no, we definitely want to get married, we want it to go ahead, we understand that things might change, then it's very hard to say to that venue, you know, we're not paying for this because you've not been able to deliver it. It's going to be a conversation to have with your venue, but perhaps one, if you're getting married on the 15th, to have now rather than later. And there may be things that they can do. You know, if they are also a hotel or a restaurant, remember they can still offer that food to their regular clients. So they may well be able just to reduce those losses and therefore reduce that risk. don't know how you can have a certain amount of family members from different households to a wedding, but you can. For some reason, I can't open these messages. But I think the issue with weddings is it's different households coming from different parts of the country and getting very close together. Do you think Dad can walk me down the aisle? Speak to your registrar on this. The fact that it's November, or your church, November 2020, hopefully things might have changed a little bit, particularly on things like that just seem common sense. I would hope that guidance will be in the next update. The only thing that really changed in the last update, other than face coverings, the most significant thing would be on the numbers for catering, but of course that then became irrelevant because we can't have catering anyway. So it meant that the limit of 30 people that did include your venue staff could also include catering staff if it's outside caterers. So same in Italy, is based on venue capacity respecting social distancing. So that's very much what everyone is wanting. It would allow venues to be profitable when they open, which is important. It would allow all suppliers to be involved, and most importantly, it would give that fairness, that parity across all of our cultures. There are some huge wedding venues that specialise in Asian weddings, particularly in the north of the country. They are all over the country, but a huge number of them in the north. And we've been working with some of those venue owners, and they can't open these huge places. Yet it would be a much safer place than these underground weddings that perhaps are happening in marquees, in gardens. It'd be much safer for them to be in a COVID secure environment with toilets and everything else. I think we've covered a lot of these questions. Yeah, so Laura, who's already covered, cancelled once just before. Our registrar wore visors. My son had to walk me down the aisle as we're from the same household. Yeah, that's a really good solution. Really, really good solution. I'm sure your dad will understand, and they don't want to cause, no one wants to cause their daughter stress, especially a dad, so they would understand. Get your son to do it. That's a really, really nice idea. Yes, Karen, mental health issues, our survey showed it's 87% of couples are experience real anxiety. It'll make you stronger though. It'll pull you together. So it's incredibly hard, but support each other, and this is where it's great to be talking on Facebook. So when is the government making a further announcement about wedding updates? So for Scotland, 20th of August. Not expecting anything in particular in Wales. That's likely to be at the very last minute whenever they make changes. Northern Ireland, not sure. We are assuming in England it will be shortly before the 15th. But we're still waiting for that guidance on what a COVID secure wedding might be. So there might be something on that any day. I think, and sorry, Joe, to hear that you're off work now with stress and anxiety. You are not alone. It was a very large number of brides in particular. It seems to be brides more affected than grooms, saying that the level of stress is such that that they're unable to go about their normal day. Please don't let it ruin your life. I know that's really, really hard. It is a wedding day. It's about the two of you vowing to spend the rest of your days together and celebrating that in front of family and friends. And this is something that, say those vows to each other now. Family and friends can wait. Just remind yourself what's really important here. It's about the two of you, so just try not to get too anxious. There's nothing we can do, and it's more important that you and all of your guests are kept absolutely safe. We're so worried that if we don't go ahead in December, wedding insurance won't cover us. Yeah, we just don't know, but what we do know is that hopefully there won't be the need to claim on wedding insurance. So couples have been really, really helpful in postponing, not cancelling. It's really helped businesses stay afloat and be able to plan, and that's been really important. So the worry was that if everyone suddenly starts cancelling and asking for refunds, then that can be really, really damaging. And thank you. You've not done that. You've looked at the bigger picture. You've gone, no, we need weddings to be happening next year. Let's get married next year. Let's wait until then. So many couples have actually volunteered their final payment early, which is amazing to hear, to help their venue through this. You know, it's like having a third winter. We've lost this summer season. We're really hoping that the government is going to get behind the industry, and we really appreciate all of the support we've had from couples. I know a lot of couples have written to their MPs, and if you're in an area where you have an MP that has some oomph, then, you know, please do that and join in with the What About Wedding campaign that's all over social media. So join in with that hashtag, and that will really help raise awareness as well. So yeah, for December, remaining positive. That's good to hear. I think most of these questions we have now covered. So what I'm going to do, I will have a look through them again, and feel free, if you think of anything overnight, just pop a question on there. Nikita and I will make sure we get all of those answered if we can. So fingers crossed we've got more positive news for you next time. Sorry this has been, unless you're in Wales, it's not been the most positive, but hopefully we've managed to answer a lot of questions. If you're not already getting our newsletters, please make sure, just sign up for a wedding planner on guidesforbrides.co.uk, and it means you'll get all of the newsletters and any other information. We are starting to post information on YouTube as well, so if you don't follow us on YouTube, please pop across there now. If it's the one good deed you do for Guides for Brides today, just pop across to YouTube /Guides for Brides, and give us a little follow or a like. I can never remember which one it is on there, and that will just mean you get the updates that we put on there. We'll be putting sort of more information on things like sort of sequel weddings and insurance and all of the sort of the bigger issues on there that don't have quite such a sort of question and answer element. So give us a follow, and we'll really, really appreciate that. That would be very kind. As I said before, we will be sending something out to all of our lovely couples next week about reviews, because we really want you, if your supplier has looked after you or your venue at this really, really hard time, we want to let every other bride and groom know about that. We want to flood the website with all these lovely positive reviews, so that everyone knows who has been really helpful. Probably 98% of venues and suppliers have been so incredible to their couples. So let's make sure they know how appreciated they are. So we'll be sending that out next week. Until then, unless there's an update, in which case, of course, I will be back. I wish you a very good week, and please, good mental health, try to relax, and yeah, we will try and keep you updated as much as we can. Thank you.